Welcome back to Investigate Joe Rogan, the podcast where normally I fact check the guests of the Joe Rogan Experience and Joe Rogan himself. But today I have a different sort of episode where I have an interview/conversation with the host of Joe Rogan Experience Review, which is another podcast. And if you listen to this and you think, this seems like a pretty cool guy, you can go listen to that podcast pretty much on any platform, I believe. You can look for their logo, which is really good because it has a funny picture of Joe Rogan making a weird face. So you should at least go check it out just to look at the logo, even if you don't end up actually listening to it. You got to at least look into it. I might do more episodes like this in the future. I'm not sure. We covered a lot of ground here, discussing Rogan-related topics, Britain, Peep Show, fighting, batons. Anyway, here is the interview. Usually you have a co-host, and I demand to know why he is not here.
Oh, he's in Jamaica. It's his birthday. So we did record one yesterday, but because he's on vacation, it was hard to get him. But he did want to do it.
Oh, I heard that in the episode, but I thought that was a joke for some reason.
Everything he says sounds like a joke.
But he really is not in the country.
He's 100% there.
Oh.
And he lives in Venice anyway, and I live in Bozeman, Montana. So we would have had to figure out something. I guess you can do 3 different people on a Zoom, right? We could have figured that out.
So he lives in Italy?
No. Venice, California.
Oh.
That's where I started the podcast. I used to live in Santa Monica.
Oh, okay. And before you used to live in Santa Monica, did you used to live in the UK?
Well, I was born there, yeah. So I moved to the US when I was 13. And then I moved back there after high school too.
Oh, okay. I've got all sorts of like British questions, and I feel like they won't really work now.
Why?
Well, like the first question I was going to ask is JRE like big in the UK?
Yes, it's very popular there.
Oh, see, I didn't know that. And then this is the real question. If Joe Rogan was British, how do you think JRE would be different?
That's a good question. I mean, assuming he's the same type of guy, like if I could just imagine a British guy that's like Joe, like that kind of energy, I think it would do well. It wouldn't have the reach though, because there would be so many different factors. Like British podcasts don't take off in the same way in the US. So there would be some limitations there, but guys like that exist there. I think that's probably why it resonates there and in most places. I mean, Joe's pretty popular kind of all over the world from what I understand.
So you don't think that he's like a uniquely American sort of human? There are Joe Rogans walking around in the UK. That's what you're telling me.
I mean, I don't know if it's Joe Rogan's there, but there's what's the base of Joe Rogan? Like in a lot of ways, he's broy, or at least he was initially. He's probably a little more enlightened now with the podcast and all the experience of talking to different people. But I think that initially was his attraction, the attraction to him for a lot of people. I assume his show is primarily guys that listen. And we got bros in England.
That's an interesting question. What is the base of Joe Rogan? I don't think I can answer that. But that is interesting.
There's a lot of unanswered questions with this that I thought I would figure out by doing the review, but still up in the air.
I feel the same way sometimes. The other question I have related to this is like, do you how should I say? Like, Joe Rogan, the show is mostly about like American things. Most of the guests are American. Like, do you feel like you've learned a lot about like American politics and stuff via Joe Rogan? I mean, I guess you've lived here for a long time, obviously, but still.
Um, yeah, I think so. You know, definitely when he has political guests on. I mean, a lot of his guests get into politics. You know, they have their opinions, but if it's a comedian or someone that's not like uh you know, in news or reporting or specifically in politics, I mean, other than listening to their opinion, I'm not really learning from it. I'm just getting an idea of like what their opinion is. But he has good guests on that really know what they're talking about when it comes to politics, especially some of those reporters that he has on. And I think it's a good way to get the information because instead of just reading an article or watching a little clip on TV, I mean, they can really expand on their points. So I think that's super useful.
Yeah, I agree that it's definitely more worthwhile to listen to something explained at length than just reading a headline that doesn't really give you that much information. Do you think that there are people who sort of like how there are people in America, such as myself, who watch anime and then decide like, yeah, I think that this is what Japan is like. Do you think there are people in the UK who watch Joe Rogan and possibly are too influenced by it and they think that America is like that?
100%. I mean, you have to think how long he has their ear for. If you're a big Rogan fan, you might be listening upwards of what, 15 hours a week? That's an incredible amount of time to be listening to any sort of narrative. And especially if you're a fan of it, you're more inclined to believe it. So yeah, his influence is massive. I mean, that's kind of why I started doing the podcast to start with. It was 5 years ago, and he wasn't as big, obviously, as he is now. I mean, as far as I know, it's the number one show podcast in the world. Like some of the most listened to media that exists. And even back then, I knew it was something special. And not to say like special, like this is amazing, but something that was going to get very big and have a lot of influence. So in some way, I was marginally concerned that his message might not be all that positive. I mean, I didn't really think that, but like take the Kardashians, for example, that show. They have massive influence. And I don't think it's all that positive. You know, I mean, I'm not really knocking them, like, whatever, do your thing. People enjoy it. But what's their message? You know, it's a lot of vanity in that show and whatever else. I don't watch a lot of it. But I was thinking, okay, if a lot of bro type guys are listening to Rogan, what's the message going to be? Is this beneficial for them? Is this like useful? I mean, does that make sense?
Yeah, that is always on my mind as well. If you had to, and this is a tough question, if you had to rank the influence of the Joe Rogan Experience on a scale from 0 being pure negative, he is a force of like unrelenting evil in society, to 100 being like beacon of like pure positive influence, where would you put that?
That is a good question. Ooh. I don't know, around 75, maybe 80. I mean, if you look at it that way, like anything below 50 has to be in it being slightly negative, right? So anything over 50 is somewhat positive. And it's quite a few points above that, but it can't be perfect. Like, I don't know. That's a good question. But yeah, maybe somewhere around there. What's an 80? Like a B minus? It seems a bit harsh when I say it that way, but that's about where I think.
Okay, so would you say you're relatively optimistic then?
About his show and his message, yeah, I think so, for sure. I mean, I'm obviously a fan of it. Um, and I think it is you like he has a lot of positive messages to put forward. And I could imagine, though I don't really know, I haven't had enough conversations in depth with people that have integrated positive things that they've heard from the podcast into their life. But I'm sure it happens, you know. I mean, even take jujitsu. When does he not bring that up? He must bring it up at least once every week.
That's true.
And a lot of people that I train with started because they heard it on Rogan. And I've seen the benefits of doing that martial art and how it carries over into other aspects of their life. So that's a good thing.
That actually leads me into another question I wanted to bring up. Probably the biggest topic on the Joe Rogan Experience, about which I truly know nothing at all, is fighting. So as someone who I could tell from your podcast, like, knows about fighting, does Joe Rogan know what he's talking about? Are his fighting opinions generally accurate, would you say? Because I really have no
Definitely.
idea.
Yeah. I mean, he's an expert on the commentary side. I mean, really, no one has more experience than him. And then his accolades in Taekwondo are legit. I mean, he was a nationally ranked Taekwondo competitor. I mean, and there are other fighters like GSP that have spoken before on his podcast about just his technique, how much power he can make, and he's a legit black belt in jiu-jitsu. Like, he trains with some of the greatest jiu-jitsu guys of all time. I mean, I don't know how much more you would need to know for somebody to say, yeah, he's legit.
That does sound pretty legit. One of the things he said that I always thought sounded cool, even though I don't really know anything about fighting, is instead of having a cage like in the UFC, having a big basketball court. Would that work? That seems cool.
I don't know. I mean, as a fan of UFC, and I've watched that sport forever, like, it seems like, I don't know. Like, I get what he's saying, because you can't squash him against the cage. And then, so I guess there's pros and cons to everything. But what does that even look like? It's just like the Roman Colosseum and people are just running around. It seems like it would be problematic.
Even with my limited knowledge, I can see how that would be problematic. Yeah. I was also going to ask if you feel as though you would do well in a fight against Joe Rogan.
Oh, absolutely not. No way. He would smash me. At 53, he would 100% smash me, for sure.
What if you and your co-host were to fight him at the same time?
Oh, still the same. My co-host doesn't know how to fight. He just works out a lot. He's going to get mad that I say this, but he doesn't have, like, martial arts experience, put it that way.
He's not here. You can say whatever you want.
I know. I say whatever I want anyway, so it's not going to matter.
Oh.
But that would be my opinion of that. It wouldn't be good. I mean, Joe probably would do some damage very quickly.
What? Here, I'll expand it slightly.
All right.
What do you think is the least powerful weapon you would need to be equipped with in order to defeat Joe Rogan? Obviously, if you had a gun, you would win. And if you had, what's question. Like the least effective weapon you could take?
Yeah, I don't know. My guess would probably be like one of those extendable batons. You know, the cops have, they're like a steel thing that just expands out.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably a very effective weapon that you could do some damage with quickly.
Oh yeah, my friend hit me with a plastic one and it hurt pretty bad.
Oh yeah, the brutal.
So
So
you
so
think,
maybe that, but I still wouldn't fancy my chances. I mean, if you drop it or you miss, I mean, yeah,
but if you could get him a good whack,
that would be the hope.
these are the real questions.
Yeah, that's it. We're really investigating this one.
I guess to ask some somewhat more relevant questions. Obviously, Rogan has certain things that he basically says in every episode. What would you say is your favorite and least favorite sort of copy paste Joe Rogan rant that happens?
My favorite ones are still when he somehow can bring up either chimpanzee attacks or bear attacks out of nowhere. It just amazes me that he can steer the conversation in that way, and that happens a lot. But I never seem to get bored of it.
Yeah, I always like hearing about that as well. But so, what is the least favorite then?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I have things that have been recently popping up that get on my nerves. Cancel culture stuff, but that usually is like from the guest because it happened to them, and then that becomes the whole episode. And I know that a lot of celebrities and people with like a big media presence are facing this, and it's a big problem for them. At least in their world, it's a big deal. But I kind of get sick of it a little bit. And then a lot of the COVID talk, to be honest. But I guess that's just everyone. But I mean, in the last year, it's the same thing. It's like I'd be interested to know how many minutes a week of his podcast is just like, going over mask stuff or like frustrations with lockdowns. And I guess it needs to be talked about because it's happening. But I don't know. I can't. I just barely review it. I'm like, okay, that happened again. Let's skip past it.
That when you said how many minutes per week, I think going forward, I am going to keep track of that. I'm going to actually figure out what percent of the episode was spent talking about COVID or cancel culture. And then I'll be able to actually make like a graph. That's a good idea.
I think that would be great. And, your show is perfect for that. That's why I like listening to your show, for things like that, because that's not the work that I'm putting in. And I wish I had more time to do it. But I think it's information that's useful. You should cover gender identity stuff too. Maybe graph that, because that one comes up a lot.
Yeah, that is definitely a big topic. Although I think you're right in that Twitter is probably the most dominant topic of them all.
Yeah, it's like the overarching conversation, like how that whole system works and how frustrating it is for people.
Yeah,
You use Twitter?
No, I only post things for my podcast. So I think I'm probably in the same boat as you in that I just don't really care that much. Is that would you say that's where you're at?
Yeah, I don't post there at all. I mean, I have an Instagram for my podcast, which I barely use anyway. I probably should do more things, but I kind of feel like I want to stay away from it. That's why I for a minute got into posting the podcast on YouTube, like just thinking that is like a growth area. But then I pulled away as well because a lot of the conversation is like the restrictions that YouTube puts on videos or demonetizing. I wasn't worried about it happening to me. I just wanted to stay away from that whole world. I was like, all I'm doing is just kind of holding a conversation about a podcast that exists. So when those other topics come up, I never have to like be pulled into that in any way.
Yeah, I see what you mean. You said that you do not fear sort of YouTube cracking down. However, I have noticed that you have frequent disclaimers that you are not associated with Joe Rogan. At some point in the past, has Joe Rogan or like has the show like contacted you and say like, hey, You can't have the name of your show be this or whatever.
No, no, I kind of just do that out of respect, really. I mean, I don't want people sometimes email me thinking I'm Joe. So there is some confusion out there. So I just want to
They
make
do?
it clear. Yeah, they like write a message about a guest that's coming on, and I just reply like, "Oh, I'm not Joe. I just do the review." Like I don't want to pretend anything like that. That'd be weird.
I think you should. I think you should just lead them on.
Just mess with them. If I have more time, maybe, but no, that's the reason I put the disclaimer in. And also the disclaimer kind of explains what it does. Like it's a strange idea. When I started it, I knew that right away from the feedback I get from others. Like 0 people were supportive of this idea. 0. My friends just mocked me for it. And I'm like, I don't care. I like it. I think it's interesting. And now there's some other guys that do it, and then you do like your version of it. And I think it's great. And I'm not surprised because his platform is so big that I think it's an excellent idea for people to come in with different analysis of it, like in their own way.
Well, I obviously agree with that. It is worth looking into. But if you haven't come under legal scrutiny yet, if Joe Rogan were to show up at your house and demand an explanation for your actions, what do you think your reaction would be?
Oh, like if he was mad at me?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I'd just say, all right, sorry. Like, you want me to stop? I could stop, I guess. I mean, I'm not in it to like upset anybody. I'm not trying to be a pain in the ass. And, look at our reviews. It upsets people. I get it, but I do it. So I've talked to him a couple of times at the Comedy Store. I've never talked about my podcast because it just would be weird for it to come up. But I used to go to this show called Stand Up on the Spot. And it's a show that he always used to do. He used to do it a couple of times a month. And it's a really challenging show because people would yell out from the audience topics and different things. But what was really cool about going to that show is because it's off the cuff, it's not really his stand-up material. He'd often talk about the podcast, like its influence and what it means to him. And like, it was just an interesting avenue. But I was doing stand-up at the time. So even if he wasn't on the show, I would have gone to that show. I liked it anyway. And I was at the Comedy Store quite a bit, but it was just a cool insight into how he was. And I've kind of always just got the feel from him that he's not going to care. Like, he doesn't seem to be like, he doesn't like cancel culture, right? He also thinks everyone should have a podcast and do a podcast about what you enjoy. So I don't imagine that he would be too annoyed about this.
No, I can't imagine that he would care much either. But you have met Joe Rogan in real life?
Yes.
What was that like? What did you say? What did he say?
Well, one time I met him and just said, "Hey, I'm a fan," and shook his hand, and that was it. And then the other times that I've spoken to him were directly through that show. So I was always what makes those shows good is when the audience has like good topics to bring up for the comedians to talk about. And I knew the people that Jeremiah Watkins put on the show, and I knew the people that he worked with at the show. So they were always good about getting me tickets, even when it was full up. Like they would just get me in. And, so it didn't matter who the comedian was on the stage. Like I would always try and come up with some good topics for them to talk about. And that was mostly the interaction there. It wasn't like I was having real chats with him. I never even really cared to. It wasn't like a motivation. It just happened to be that he was on that show. So, it was a bit sneaky though, because I try and get him to talk about some things from the podcast that I was interested in, but it was difficult to kind of spin them into a topic he could do comedy with.
This leads into an even more important question. Since you have encountered Joe Rogan in real life, obviously this is a matter of huge controversy within the Roganverse. If you had to estimate, how tall would you say he is?
That's a great question. I'm 6'3", so everyone looks kind of short next to me, and because he's so wide, like he's a tank of a man, it makes him look shorter. Because he's just, I don't know, all that testosterone that he's taken. I mean, he's jacked, so he does look kind of short, but I think he's like 5'8". I don't think it's like, he doesn't look like a midget. I mean, he looks like a normal sized guy, but just, thick.
That is strong, interesting, man. Like I've seen estimates much lower than this.
Yeah. Is there like an official thing online? I've never looked at it. Let me Google it now.
I don't trust anything that I see on the internet. It's like wrestling. It's like they bill people as being like 7 foot, right. 400 pounds.
It's like looking up people's net worths and everyone's a millionaire.
Yeah. You never know who could have made that up.
Yeah, it could have been Jamie. Oh, it says 5'7". That's probably about right. I mean, 5'7" is not very tall. He says he's not very tall.
Yeah. Interesting. I saw this is here's another question related to this. And I'm thinking of this not because I wrote this down or because it would have come to mind otherwise, but because I saw this in a Kanye West related discussion. What did he smell like?
Who? Joe Rogan?
Yes.
I have no idea. I didn't smell him.
Oh. I was just wondering if perhaps he had a unique smell, like the forest or like a moose or something.
An elk.
It could be.
Who knows? Yeah, I have no idea what he smells like. Do you know what anyone smells like? Could you describe anyone based on their smell?
I think people I know who always use a certain like hair product or like perfume. I could.
Oh yeah, I have some friends that use too much cologne and they always smell like that.
Yeah, but it's not always bad.
It's just what they smell like. I think it's unnecessary, but whatever they want.
Well, I do wish you'd had an answer for that, but you brought up something else, which I wanted to ask about. Yeah. Which was, do you get weird emails and comments from people on the internet who hate you based on the fact that you have said something about Joe Rogan?
I don't get any hate emails. Nobody emails me saying shitty things. The only place that pops up is in the comments, and I barely ever look at those, which is a good lesson from Joe Rogan that people should take on if they do what we do. Don't look at them because they make you sad. But I have noticed that like some people are just like moron, dumb, stealing his work or whatever. I'm like, all right. But I like people's opinions. Like people are allowed to have them. I would never want to stop that. I mean, if I had a magic wand and could choose who reviews me, and like I wouldn't only choose 5-star reviews. Like that doesn't work. Just let people say whatever they want, but it doesn't mean I have to read it.
I agree with what you said. However, I would say that if I had a magic wand, I would definitely get corrupted instantly. I would not be like a hobbit. I would definitely be more like Saruman in that respect.
Yeah, you got to watch that. I did notice that you said at the end of one of your pods, and it made me laugh, that if you want to review, give 5 stars, and if you don't, what do you say? You'll hunt them down.
I did, and I stand by that.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. It was very funny.
Do you, with these negative remarks that can appear sometimes, do you detect the existence of a group of people out there in the world who are perhaps too attached to Joe Rogan?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, when I reviewed the, what is his name? Alex, what's his crazy friend called? Bless him.
Alex Jones.
Alex Jones. There we go. I don't know how I forgot that. But yeah, I reviewed him one time, and I'm not negative against Alex Jones. Like, I try not to do that really ever on my podcast, really. Like, I don't think that that's the point of what I'm doing. But I must have said something because someone went off in the comments about my review of him. And he was clearly a huge Alex Jones fan. So he got real upset.
Oh, there's definitely some people out there who are way too attached to Alex Jones as well. That goes without saying.
And I'm sure that most of the hate for the podcast and the reviews comes from, they're like massive love for Rogan's show, and they feel like, I don't really know what the feeling could be. I don't see the point of giving something like a podcast low ratings. Like, if you don't like it, don't listen. And if you like it, then let people know. It's not like you're reviewing a pair of sneakers on Amazon that showed up and were like kind of crappy. Like, that's useful to the consumer. But when it comes to a podcast, if you don't like it, that's okay. But other people may. It's definitely like just an opinion. It's not a physical product. So I don't know why they're probably grumpy people.
But you see, my opinions are correct, and thus everyone must be made aware of them.
Oh, you're saying they're like that?
Yes.
Yeah, of course. Of course they think that. That's why they want to do it. And fair play to them. They're allowed to do it then. But I don't get it. I think if they probably had a look at like themselves. Somebody told me once that they added up all their star reviews from like Yelp, Amazon, like anywhere where they would have left reviews, and they realized that they were like averaging about 3, and they decided just themselves that actually reflected their own like positivity, and they decided to like alter it. Now, I don't know if that's an experiment worth running for anybody, but it is kind of interesting. Like, his conclusion was that he was a 3-star person. I don't know if it works across the board, but I thought that was interesting.
Huh. That is kind of interesting. You know, bringing up Alex Jones, I did want to ask, who is your like favorite guest in general?
Favorite all time, or like favorite repeating guest? Because they're a bit different.
I guess that is a different question. Who's your favorite repeating guest?
It's got to be Joey Diaz. He's been there since the beginning, and he's always a wild animal when he's on. I mean, I love Joey Diaz. Watching his stand-up live Joe is correct. He probably is the funniest person I've ever seen. And he's just so interesting. Like, what a character.
I enjoyed him in Spider-Man.
He was in Spider-Man?
Yeah, he has like a little cameo.
Oh, yeah.
He's like a random New York citizen.
So he probably repeated all time. Who did I enjoy? I don't know. That's a tough one. Let me think about that one. I probably should already have that stored away, but I can't think of it right now.
That is a tough one because there's 800 million episodes.
Yeah.
Who would you say is your favorite recent guest?
Well, I really like Lex Friedman on there, but mostly I'm kind of watching his progression as a podcaster and a guest, because like he's getting better at doing it. And he's just, he's always good on there. But again, that's a more repeated one.
Maybe this is an easier question. Who is your least favorite guest?
Yeah, that one is kind of tough.
Oh, maybe that's not easier.
Well, I don't know. Like, I didn't really vibe with that Zuby podcast recently. I didn't dislike him as a person or a guest, but like, isn't he a rapper or something? And all he talked about was COVID.
Many such cases, I'm afraid, when it comes to JRE guests.
Right? And I mean, I don't know. I like to learn about the person. That's what I was interested in. I know he's like British or like or at least he's popular in England, I think. And then he's a rapper and other things, but he didn't get into a lot of that. It just kind of was like COVID talk. So I don't know. I know it because without even realizing, it's like a podcast I won't listen to all the way through. I'll do it in chunks. And then it tells me right away that I'm like kind of just losing interest in the conversation. I can usually I'll go right through all of them.
Yeah, I definitely feel the same about that particular subject. If you were in charge, if you were the Jamie, who we all know is secretly in charge of everything,
Yeah.
who would be like your dream guests?
Oh, it's got to be Matt Stone and Trey Parker. I'm still waiting for them to come on.
Huh, now you think about it, it's kind of surprising that they have never been on.
100%. And Joe's a huge fan of them. I don't know why they haven't gone on. I think that they would be a phenomenal guest or a couple of guests. And I am just waiting big time. Oh, to answer your other question, probably at least recently, Quentin Tarantino was a great guest that came on. I really enjoyed that podcast. Super interesting.
He really is a very interesting guy.
Yep.
Is there anyone else who you've been waiting to appear on the Joe Rogan Experience?
The Tiger King. I don't know if that can ever happen. Like he's in jail, but if he ever gets out, yeah, that would be a great podcast.
That would be an incredible podcast.
Hell yeah, it would. That guy's an absolute lunatic, and Joe's going to get him hammered.
That could potentially be the best episode ever, actually, now that you bring it up.
That's what I'm thinking. There's going to be a lot of fact checking for you to do in that one.
I don't think I could keep up with that.
You wouldn't be able to do it in 10 minutes.
This has been discussed a little bit on Jerry. He has like talked about this. Would you want to see a Joe Rogan interviews the president episode?
Oh yeah, definitely. 100%. I know Mark Maron interviewed Barack Obama. And was he still president then? I don't know.
I think he was, yeah.
Okay, yeah. I mean, of course. I honestly think that they should do the debates. They should have a debate version on Rogan's podcast. Look how bad the debates are. You learn nothing about the candidates, really. I mean, a 3-hour conversation with both of them, whoever they're going to be. I think that's a great idea.
It really would be better. And like when you say that, it kind of makes people think that you're like a delusional like Roganite, but it would genuinely be better.
Yeah, but see, exactly what you're saying is something that's existed since the beginning of his podcast. It's like, well, it's only Joe Rogan. He's the fear factor guy. Listen, it's one of the most listened to shows in the world. So I don't know how much more legit it has to be. Like what? Because he doesn't wear a suit? It's like, I'm sorry, you got to get over it. Like that the size of the show it speaks for itself. So to have an audience like that, and also, the way that he does ask his questions, I mean, he is kind of like representing the average Joe conversation. So instead of them being like carefully constructed news questions that usually are thrown at these politicians during debates, it'd just be like Joe's style, regular type of questions. Like, what do you think of this? What's that? I mean, yeah, I think it would be super valuable. We won't know until it happens, but I think eventually it'll be so big that they almost won't have a choice because they're trying to get their message out, right? I mean, there's so much advertising that goes into these political campaigns. So what better way to do it than go on Rogan and hopefully do well, like not screw up.
Yeah, I think I guess the closest he came was Bernie coming on when he was campaigning.
Yeah, Bernie's probably the biggest, right? You would think, but I mean, he has Congress people on sometimes. He's kind of getting there. I think he's working towards that.
Do you think, and this is a theory I've had for a while now, do you think his anti-vaccine opinions could be preventing sort of more famous A-list, you could say, level guests from going on?
It's definitely problematic because he has had blowback about it. Like there is talk now about him being kind of anti-vaxxer, and that's not a label that you want to have, definitely in Hollywood. I mean, that's the kind of thing that happens, and probably, yeah, probably there are people that will stick him with that forever and not want to do his show. But I don't know.
Now I'm just imagining Joe Rogan wearing a suit now since he said that, and it's really weird. It's kind of a cursed image.
He wears one when he commentates for the UFC.
Oh, see, there you go. I
Yeah,
know so little about fighting. I've never even seen him.
yeah, he wears that.
You know, here's something kind of less related. But do you ever listen to like really old clips of Joe Rogan from like back when he was hosting Fear Factor, and you realize that his voice has changed dramatically?
Oh yeah, it's quite a lot deeper now. Doesn't that kind of naturally happen as you age anyway? I don't really know. Maybe it's the testosterone.
I have wondered about that.
He's got thicker, stronger vocal cords.
I get vocal cords are a muscle, right?
And knowing Joe, he's probably figured out an exercise for that too.
I think I have now asked all of the questions I have written down here, except one which would have been better to ask more at the beginning, but I will bring it up anyway. Is Peep Show real? Is that an accurate depiction of life in England?
Oh, I mean, it's a funny comedy. Yeah, there's probably goofy roommates like that.
That's too bad. Yeah, I wouldn't want that to exist in real life.
I can't be sure, but I would imagine something close. That's a funny show, though. Those guys are great. They used to have another show that was more skits, and it was, I swear, like one of the funniest skit shows I've ever seen in my life. I can't remember what it's called, though.
The Mitchell and Webb.
It was just their names. Like what? I can't remember though. But if you ever get a chance, look it up. Yeah, look it up. It's brilliant. They had some amazing skits on there. Very English though, so I don't 100% know how it would translate here, but probably pretty good.
Yeah, I'll be honest. A lot of the skits about like
it's
cool
called,
kind of went over my head.
Yeah, it's called Mitchell and Webb is their skit show. So it's the same two guys that do that.
I wonder if David Mitchell would be a good guest on JRE.
Oh yeah, for sure. He'd be good. Oh, Ricky Gervais would be a great one. I don't know why he hasn't gone on either, because I know they know each other.
I can definitely imagine Ricky Gervais and Joe Rogan getting along, but somehow I can't quite picture David Mitchell and Joe Rogan really vibing.
Yeah, he might be too much of a nerd.
I think so.
But I'm sure they would.
I don't know, that could be an awkward episode.
Maybe, yeah. Joe has had some of those. I was trying to think of the lady that he had on one time. She's an African-American, like Republican, kind of political analyst, and they argued a lot about climate change. Do you remember who that guest was?
Oh, her name escapes me though.
Yeah, but that was uncomfortable. That was like an uncomfortable podcast. I'm like, ooh, she is not coming back on.
I feel like there hasn't been a real awkward one in a while.
Yeah, I think he's getting better. Yeah, I think what he did was he would just somebody would be making news somewhere, and then he'd be interested to talk to him, but not really know a lot about them. And they get on, and then all of a sudden these ideas all clash, or maybe the guest doesn't have an idea that's really well thought out, and they're not used to being kind of questioned, which Joe does. Like, he really stands behind what he thinks unless he changes it. So I think he is probably quite a difficult person to argue with.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the awkward ones are probably generated by the people being brought in, not based on personality. Probably that's what happens.
Mm.
I think, now we've discussed, the guests, the height, the smell, peep show, obviously.
Very
Um,
important.
I think that's kind of everything I wanted to ask.
All right, man.
You are my first guest ever to ever appear on Investigate Joe Rogan.
Well, you did well. You had questions. Like, you should have more guests on.
Like, well, you had questions.
No, you did a good job, man. This is a good conversation. You should do this more often. I kind of wanted to set my show up in a way to where I would have conversations with Rogan fans kind of weekly, but as you can imagine, that's problematic, like organizing it. And I did once reach out before my current co-host did the show all the time, like he does, and I announced on my podcast, like, I'm looking for someone to be a co-host, so email me if you want to. And I had no idea what my engagement could be, because I'd never asked a question before, and I was just inundated with people. So it was like there was just way too many, but a lot of people were interested in that. And I'm like, oh, okay, people are kind of paying attention. I guess I just never thought about it.
Maybe I should do that and then pick the craziest person possible.
Might not be a bad idea. Might not be. Or at least someone who's like really good at gathering stats so that you can just talk about them and you don't have to do it as much.
Yeah, I get like a dedicated nerd.
Perfect. Have you thought about it? Let me ask you a few questions, if you don't mind, about your podcast, because
Sure.
I'm interested. You don't do every one, obviously, probably too much work. How do you pick the podcasts that you talk about?
I pick the ones that are interesting to me personally, that I think other people will be interested in, and ones that have something that is actually worth fact checking.
Okay, that's what I assumed, but I was just interested in like how you set that up. And then you kind of average, like, I guess, like 10 to 20 minutes. Is there a reason for that? Like, have you got any feedback about that being a length of time of pod that's good for the people listening, or is it just a personal preference?
I actually never have consciously aimed for a particular time. That's kind of just how long it takes.
Fair enough.
I
Yeah.
guess this will be the longest episode ever.
For you, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's nice that it's nice little short segments, to be honest, because you can get through a bunch of them quickly.
It is kind of weird though. Sometimes I wonder, like, is this what people want? Like, most podcasts are really long.
Yeah. Maybe just ask. You could always ask. People will tell you. They email you if you have an email set up. I mean, it never hurts to get some feedback, and you can choose whatever way you want. I would always say the most important thing, and at least from me, and I'm not trying to give you advice, but like, this is just what I think about, is always do it so that you enjoy it. That's got to be number one, because they kind of are pressures. Like, I'm sure your podcast will over the years grow quite big, and when it does, it starts to change into something else potentially. So especially if you're getting advertisers and other things like that. So yeah, just always do it the way that you enjoy it, because that should be number one.
I think that's really good advice. I think that's really good advice for like anything creative too, and especially comedy. Because I feel like if you try and do something that you think other people will find funny, it usually doesn't work. But then if you just do something that you find funny, then you can just hope that other people will find it funny. And then if it's good, it'll just work out.
100%. When I first started comedy, I was like writing all of my jokes in the style of Anthony Jeselnik. Like, I don't know why, but this is pretty common for people when they start out doing stand-up, because you just have no idea how to do it. And it was so inauthentic. And like, I'm no way as good of a joke writer as that guy who's a master. And it was a mess. It wasn't even like how I make people laugh generally. And it took years for me to just kind of like, you just keep falling down over and over. And if you don't quit, then it starts to become something where you're like, oh, this is how I should do this. Like, you just, yeah, that's it. Like, those influences are weird, though. They work their way in. That's why it probably would be a good idea for you to get a co-host too, because when you're bouncing ideas off each other, like, it's not just you alone. I mean, one, it takes some of the pressure off. Two, it kind of keeps the conversation moving, though you do a good job on your own. So maybe that's not necessary. It's not required that you would do it, but you might just find it more enjoyable.
Yeah, maybe that's something I could experiment with. I do think that would be fun.
What is your goal and hope for the podcast?
I don't know. I guess I really just have short-term goals. Like, I'm going to make this episode, and I try and make it more manageable goals like that.
That's probably good. I don't think of anything like it. Yeah, I'm not trying to do anything in particular with mine, other than just keep doing it. I enjoy it. So I hope I get to keep doing it for a while.
Yeah, talking into a microphone on the internet is actually pretty fun.
Definitely is, man. Definitely is. All right. Well,
that might be
I
a
enjoyed
good place
this.
to end.
Cool.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, good talking to you. I'm sure maybe we'd plan to do this in another year and see where our podcasts are.
Yeah, that could be cool.
All right.
Thanks for listening, everyone, to this experimental episode, and I'll see you next week.
Later.